Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Mark Swan, and I hope you're having a weird and wonderful week. I know I am. I'm enjoying the sun today. It was hailing and snowing yesterday, and I was confined to my bed, wrapped in a blanket because the heat in the apartment wasn't working, and we had to put in a work order, and the lights weren't working, and blah, 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 and I'm really doing a good job advertising for my apartment complex, but they are good people, and just in time for them to fix the heat, we have a wonderful, beautiful, sunny day today. I went for a light jog. Very uncharacteristic of me, but I'm going through some changes, and we might get into that today. I don't know. Maybe you've learned to love your humble host, Mark, as well as the other hosts of the GSMC Weird News Podcast, but we're all taking a journey together, you know? Regardless, the unofficial motto of my lovely home in Colorado is, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. Hey, I hate to say it, you guys, but I am just getting thoroughly tired of staying at home and being cooped up during these strange times. It has been a straight year of just staying in my home and working on projects, and it was really cool at first. I was thrown into basically a brand new world last April when I lost my day job and my school ended, and I had just nothing to do. So I did things like make podcasts and try and record new at-home albums and draw and write and just be stuck with myself. And we're getting to a point where I'm definitely done with it. And I have to assume that everybody else is out there too. So we are dealing with a lot of medical things right now as far as COVID is concerned, but hopefully everybody's being responsible and we can return the world to a more normal, but still weird place. I don't know what I'd do without a weird, wild world, but boy, I want it to be a world I can explore more openly soon. But hey, enough of me whining. We have a great show for you today. First off, I am bringing you a story of a whale that is trying to find sanctuary. But it's not just any whale. It's a whale that government agencies fear may be a Russian spy. You'll get the story here in just a few minutes, along with other tales of spy animals throughout history. After that, we are talking the new rotten meat diet. Boy, I am curious why we still have fad diets, but this one really takes the cake. We'll also be getting into other weird diets, and I went to social media to ask the listeners what their weirdest diet has been. Later on in the show, we are talking empathizing with your future self. There's a new psychological study that suggests that people may have a healthier time by having conversations with their future self. Don't know what that means? We'll get into it. And also, I'll be writing a letter to my future self, and you'll be there with me. And we are closing out the show tonight with 5 lesser-known cryptids. I am currently reading a book called Mysterious America by Coleman. And there were some mysterious animals out there that may or may not exist that I never heard of. And we're going to go over the top 5 that interested me. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Our first story comes from BBC News and takes us back to the end of April 2019 off the coast of Norway, where local fishermen caught a rare sight. A young male beluga whale was seen swimming along the coast of some Norwegian islands. The whale appeared to be in trouble, and it was apparent that it was caught with something around its neck. The fishermen, along with marine biologists, jumped in the water and freed the whale from its strange trappings and realized that it was actually a harness. and furthermore, it was a harness with a camera mount and markings saying it was equipment that belonged to St. Petersburg. That's St. Petersburg, Russia. Norway's domestic intelligence agency investigated the whale and the equipment and concluded that the whale is likely to have been part of a Russian research program. To summarize, the whale was most likely used in a program where it was trained to swim to other parts of the world and put itself in positions where it can videotape civil and perhaps military operations of rival countries. Of course, when Russian intelligence agencies were asked to give an answer on this whale, they refused to comment. Whether or not this particular whale was sent to Norway on some sort of spy mission, or if he escaped his pen and got lost wandering up to Norway, it still remains a mystery. After news came out of the poor beluga whale and his rescuing, he became somewhat of a media darling for Norwegian media. He was given a name here, and this is super cute. He was given the name Hvaldimir, which is a pun since the word for whale is Hval, and the Russian president's name is Vladimir Putin, obviously. They put that together and named him Hvaldimir. And please excuse me if I did not pronounce that correctly. My Norwegian is not up to snuff. After his rescue, little Hvaldimir was brought to a harbor off of Hammerfest, a Norwegian coastal town, and released to fend for himself. However, the poor thing seemed to have trouble catching fish and feeding himself. So a program was developed to help feed Hvaldimir and to observe and monitor him. In the summer of 2019, Hvaldimir seemed to make a full recovery and left the harbor town, where he was still monitored by the Norwegian program, but otherwise mostly left to his own devices. Unfortunately for our little hero, the story does not end happily then and there. Hvaldimir, even though he was free and roaming the oceans on his own, it was hard to deny for researchers that he was supposed to be a social animal that interacted with other beluga whales, and this simply wasn't happening. He was basically roaming lost in the ocean. Aside from being lonely, poor Hvaldimir was vulnerable to the elements of open waterways, including, unfortunately, man-made threats such as nets, fishing lines, hooks, and boat motors. This poor whale just can't catch a break. An American filmmaker was hoping to document Hvaldimir's little adventure, but was left unsatisfied when the whale was still basically in trouble. Thus, the filmmaker, one Regina Crosby, campaigned with the Norwegian government to have Hvaldimir relocated to a Norwegian fjord. This particular body of water would be isolated, but still open enough for Hvaldimir to live healthily. Unfortunately for everyone involved, there's been a lot of pushback from the Norwegian government as well as from marine biologists. There are researchers out there who claim that the whale is doing just fine. Meanwhile, the Norwegian government suggests that Hvaldimir would not be safe in such a fjord because whaling is still a profitable industry for the country, and they fear that little Hvaldimir would be in even greater trouble. And still, there are others who hope to put Hvaldimir into a dolphin sanctuary. Presently, Hvaldimir calls a fish farm his home, where he is able to roam freely, and although that could sound like a happy ending, there are many people who are not happy with his presence. He apparently is becoming more and more dependent on human interaction, which is a bad thing more than it is a cute thing, as a wild animal that becomes dependent on humans risks having to be put in a home of permanent captivity. Still, there are apparently pictures and videos out there of Hvaldimir playing with and teasing people in boats and off the docks of this fishery. And of course, there is no interest from the Russian government to take the spy whale back. I was attracted to Hvaldimir's story because it's almost like a Disney movie. You have this government agent whale who loses his way and ends up in a town that desperately wants to take care of him, but they just can't seem to find the resources or the means to do so. It's such a sad thing. And hey, if you're confused by the words spy whale, you may be surprised to learn that countries all around the world have taken to using animals in spy and warfare. Several countries' militaries, including the U.S. Navy, have historically used dolphins to find underwater mines and detect submarines. Our good friend the porpoise is not the only type of undersea animal to be used in naval warfare. Sea lions and sharks have also been documented to be used in spying missions. Moving from the sea to the air, pigeons, that's right, those little rats with wings, pigeons have been used in warfare since before World War I. Of course, we've all heard of messenger pigeons who were trained to fly between two locations to send discreet messages between armies and their recipients, but scientists have even attempted to fit pigeons with homing devices that would allow them to steer missiles off course or even towards other targets. Luckily, this one never flew off. See what I did there? And good thing, because I don't want to hear about animals dying for the cause. Regardless, pigeons have a long history of spying and have been used in up to modern wars, where they would do things like drop recording devices on enemy territories to help prevent ambushes. Similarly, the raven has been used in warfare. This incredibly intelligent bird outsmarts the pigeon in basically every way and has been used to spot enemies and take heavy packages from one location to another. Birds of many types and species have been accused in spy warfare between any number of countries. These relatively free-roaming animals are hard to detect, hard to catch, and are very easy to outfit with spy gear. Similarly, small rodents and lizards have been documented to be used in spying, as they are hard to detect and can be transported easily. Those poor things. I can't imagine they have any sense of patriotism. They don't know what they're doing. Of course, animals like dogs have worked alongside their human counterparts in things like policing and military maneuvers. In World War II, I'm sad to say, there were dogs who were trained to run under enemy tanks with bombs strapped to them so that they could disable said enemy tanks. And I really, really hate that story, but I'm reporting on it nevertheless. But while dogs did a lot of the brute force work for the military, it's actually cats who are on the spy side of things. In the 60s, the CIA spent millions of dollars to perform surgery on cats and fit them with recording devices so that they could naturally infiltrate Soviet embassies and record any vital and sensitive information. That makes a lot of sense to me. A cat is sleek, a cat is sneaky, a cat is lightweight and moves around as it may, and they're also relatively trainable. Unfortunately for the CIA, the program was a complete failure, as cats do what cats do, and the trained cats wandered off more than they actually got into Soviet embassies. Why am I not surprised? As a cat owner and a cat lover, let's just say it doesn't surprise me. Animals have little concern for the conflicts of men, and cats least of all. They are the most I don't give a dang about your problems animal out there. They're basically in it for the food and the love and the scritches. I mean, they're just selfish incarnates. They're not gonna spy for you. You can't convince them under any scrutiny. And while I'm having a fun time here talking about animals used for the military, it is kind of sad. I'm very much an advocate for let's leave the world as untouched as possible, especially when it comes to animals. Why are we recruiting them? It's basically against their will. Or at the very least, it's manipulating them to put them in dangerous situations. What a weird, sometimes horrifying world that we live in. Even for our friend Hvaldimir, who could escape his bindings of the Russian military world and still be put in the predicament of finding a new home. I do hope that Ms. Crosby, the filmmaker and advocate for Hvaldimir, can come to an agreement with marine biologists and the Norwegian government to find a place for this just adorable little porpoisey guy. I am definitely looking forward to the happy ending for our beluga friend. My heart goes out to him. I wish everyone involved all the best of luck. Hey, when we come back, what is the weirdest food you've ever put in your mouth for the sake of getting thinner, finding yourself healthier, feeling better about yourself? Maybe on a dare, maybe someone told you they'd pay you $200 if you ate escargot. And that's not so weird. However, after the break, I am going to go over a new fad that is just utterly disgusting and completely baffling. There is a new diet out there called the rotten meat diet, and people are doing it. It's weird. I don't know how much longer those people are living, but whatever works for each individual person. Hey, this is the GSMC Weird News Podcast, and I will be back with you after this brief message. Thanks for listening.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. You are listening to the sultry tones of your humble host, Mark Swan. Before the break, we were visiting in with our new beluga whale friend, Hvaldimir, as he escaped a Russian whale spy camp and made his way to Norway. The poor thing. He was able to free himself of his spy gear but with the help of some fishermen and marine biologists. The poor thing. But now we're trying to find young Hvaldimir a permanent home. Hvaldimir the whale being a spy may be a weird thing, but it is not an isolated incident. We've had spy animals all throughout the ages, and it just goes to show you the weird relationship that human beings have with the animals we share this planet with. It is certainly a human-only trait to utilize our furry and scaly pals for warfare, and it is also a uniquely human thing to eat our fellow animals in weird and interesting and possibly disgusting ways. Our next story takes us to the always bizarre and often unpredictable world of social media, where a new diet fad is leaving many people disgusted, but some people euphoric. The diet known as high meat, yes, you heard that correctly, high H-I-G-H meat, involves taking a cut of raw meat, and letting it rot for upwards of a year. Now, I know when I perhaps let a banana rot, or I just don't get around to eating a vegetable or cut of chicken or steak just because I wasn't hungry for it, I will throw it right in the garbage, or if I have it available, into the compost. But there are advocates on social media who are saying that after letting a piece of meat rot for over a year, you can eat it for the sake of getting a high or euphoric effect. Now, people aren't just eating old meat, old uncooked meat, that is. People aren't just eating it just to feel goofy. There are people who also say it tastes better than cooked meat and says it is cheesier and more acidic than your average steak. Look, usually I am a no judgments type of person, but there are better ways to feel euphoric. Exercise is a healthy one, and there are many other controlled substances that I'm not going to promote on this podcast that are probably a lot safer, easier to get, and probably less dangerous than letting meat rot for a year and then eating it. Also, if you are at all curious on looking this particular story up, if you are faint of heart or you get queasy easy, I would not look this up, or if I did, I would not look at any of the pictures provided with the trend, because rotten meat is positively disgusting looking, especially after a year, and after seeing this meat and then claims people eating it and loving it, I really just don't suggest it. And if you're curious because you might want to try it, we can't be friends. Thanks for listening to the podcast, but please don't hit me up. Now, this trend isn't necessarily new. There have been YouTube and Reddit threads on the consumption of old raw meat as far back as 2017. However, a Twitter conversation recently popped up that reinvigorated the conversation of this particular type of diet. Real quick, I'm going to read one such Twitter conversation. I'm not going to read their usernames for obvious reasons, but it goes a little something like this. Person 1 says, "A friend convinced me to eat raw rotten meat," and in parentheses, high meat, yesterday, and it actually felt great. Very interesting since everyone would think it's crazy. Well, crazy? No. A second person asks simply, "Did you get sick?" And the first person says, "Not at all. This is how it looked, by the way." And it is a horrifying picture of a steak that it's just, words can't describe. And this person didn't cook it. They let it rot, and then they ate it. Surprisingly, there are a growing number of proponents of this high meat trend, but of course, there are critics. No, just say it ain't so. There's people saying not to do this. Why forever not? Well, there are dietitians out there that are saying there are a number of microbes and bacteria in rotting meat that are almost assuredly present given the length of time, and it is only a matter of time before a person engaging in the high meat trend could get violently ill. I used to work in the food industry, and so I am educationally familiar with many of these bacteria and microbes that can get in your food, and this just makes my skin crawl. It is very likely that a piece of meat that has been left to rot will contain salmonella, E. coli, worms, parasites, and people are willingly putting this stuff in their mouth without any preparation. According to a study from Vice, any of these bacteria or microbes could cause uncontrollable bowel movements, large intestinal damage, vomiting, dehydration, and botulism. And when you hear that, it shouldn't come as a surprise. You have to cook your meat. We are not dogs or bears. We do not have the stomach systems to break down dangerous components of our food. The very fact that we cook our meat is one of the reasons why we are the top species on the earth today. It is theorized that over 300,000 years ago, humans started cooking meat, and the bonded proteins from just cooking your meat before you eat it can help your brain develop. When I hear that there are people who are insisting on eating not only raw meat, but old, gross, purposefully aged to the point of rotting meat, it drives me insane. It's like we're moving backwards. It's like we allowed ourselves to get so smart that we have to chase highs from rotting meat. I don't understand. I have interacted with some people who've done some weird things to their body, but this might take the cake. Like, no diet is worth this. And certainly no euphoria is worth this. Like, I don't know, drink a beer. Of course, there are ways to eat raw meat, but it just has to be preserved and prepared correctly. I think it's highly irresponsible of the person who lets meat rot in a way that they intend to eat it and get high. I just don't understand it. But I've never really been a diet guy myself. I certainly see the benefits of certain diets, but I am always skeptical of the next fad diet that comes out, and boy, do they come out so often. Anyway, this story inspired me to look up a couple other weird diets, and I don't think I could find one as gross as eating raw rotten meat, but there are some trends out there that are certainly weird. In 2011, there was talk of the baby food diet, in which people were encouraged to eat up to 16 jars of baby food every single day. The thought process behind this particular diet is that baby food is pure and has relatively unaltered ingredients and only has nutritious things that the body could want. It ultimately ended up fading because adults need more than baby food. Who would have thunk it? Speaking of kids, did you know that the Kellogg's cereal company was founded for the sake of keeping children from having impure thoughts? Yes, that's correct. A physician named John Harvey Kellogg, yes, that Kellogg, developed cornflakes thinking that bland food would help keep people, and especially children, from acting upon sexual urges. Kellogg wasn't the only physician with a wacky method to solving most of humanity's health problems. In the 19th century, there was a pill sold by snake oil salesmen that contained a tapeworm. All you had to do was eat the pill and let it dissolve in your stomach, where the tapeworm would be free, and its parasitic properties would result in miraculous weight loss. Reading the ad verbatim here, thousands of men and women have already experienced the wonders of Mother Nature's body shaper, the common tapeworm. These friendly little creatures can reside harmlessly inside your body and consume your extra calories. That's right, no more worrying about your waistline. Stay thin with Dr. Quack. Dr. Quack, huh? I'm not surprised, nor am I disputing that name. This tapeworm one might be up there with the rotting food diet. And hey, if you are eating year-long rotted food, you might get a tapeworm. Who knows? So, double diet. Good for you. Well, hey, all this talk of weird food and weird diets made me think to go to social media, where I asked the question, what is the worst food you ever made yourself eat? For a diet, for health reasons, on a dare, or etc. And I got quite a few great responses. So let's start out with Clayton from Facebook. Clayton is a long one here, but I love this story. It was this plant protein shake that tasted literally worse than grass from a lawn. It also got all gloppy to the point I could hang it upside down like a blizzard, a Dairy Queen blizzard I assume he means, and even hit and shake it. It would hang down like a massive booger that you get from a major cold. The band I was in also tried to get some of it down. We all gagged. We named it a working title, Sprout Sludge. Thanks for the answer, Clayton. I certainly am not going to try Sprout Sludge anytime soon. Christian from social media says, canned squid in soy sauce. I've seen canned squid before, and I have no words. I wouldn't call it food. I call it you open a can and there's just a dead baby animal in there. But hey, maybe the soy sauce helped get it down. I do like calamari. Nicole from social media says cottage cheese, and I'm with you on this one. Nicole, cottage cheese is weird, makes me gag. It's a big dietary thing. Why do we let our cheese ferment? Well, that's a stupid question. Cheese is just fermented anyway, but we certainly like to ferment it as far as it can go before we eat it. To me, there are some rotten cheeses out there that are as gross as rotten meat. Carol from Facebook says liver. That is something my mother made us eat. 60 years later, I can still remember that horrible taste and having to gag it down. Yuck. I'm with you. I don't think I would ever eat liver. I don't know why. We eat other parts of the animal, but for some reason the liver, yeah, I just can't imagine putting something like that in my mouth. But liver's pretty traditional meat. I guess there are some people who swear by it and good for them, but it's just not for me. Joe from Facebook says, eat? No. Snorted? Yes. On a dare for $5, I snorted sour Skittles powder. Very spicy. Joe, that sounds dangerous. That's basically powdered ascorbic acid. That could probably go real wrong for you. But, you know, you're alive to tell the tale. What is it with people who are snorting and eating things for a weird euphoric feeling? We'll probably cover it on another episode. Finally, we have Emmy from Facebook, who says that she ate a soggy fried clam sandwich after not taking my meds for 4 days and having an upset stomach. Not worth it. I did not know they made fried clam sandwiches. I suppose that makes sense. Much like the canned squid, I would not put that seafood in my mouth. Now, I thought of an answer for this question for myself, and I've eaten a lot of weird things. I kind of made it a mission to do so in my travels. I think my favorite weird thing that I ate was lengua, which is tongue. I had a lengua taco, and I was expecting to not like it, or at the very least be weirded out by it, and it was actually really good. Similarly, I had the chance to eat frog's legs at a Chinese restaurant in Los Angeles, and I wasn't impressed. I think if you're like me, you've heard of people eating frog's legs on cartoons, and it seems like such a weird thing. It just tastes like chicken. You know how everything tastes like chicken? There is a New Orleans restaurant around where I live that does a really great alligator gumbo with alligator sausage. I can't say that alligator really tastes different than regular or more traditional sausage, but I do really like it. All in all, I don't think there's a weird thing that I've eaten that I didn't like. Maybe I just have an adventurous palate or a strong stomach. I don't know. But hey, if you want to tell me the weirdest thing that you have eaten for a diet, on a dare, or just to be weird in general, hit us up on social media. You can find the GSMC Weird News Podcast on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook. And we are always posting questions, always trying to get the conversation going. And I would love to hear from you. When we get back, did you know that having a conversation with your future self might lead you to make more prosperous and healthier decisions? There is a new psychological study that involves empathizing with your future self. And also, you're going to join me as I write a letter to my future self. And hey, at the end of the show, we are doing my top 5 lesser-known cryptids. Yeah, you may know Bigfoot. Yeah, you may know the Loch Ness Monster. You might even know the Mothman. But there are some of these on these lists that you may never have heard of before. This is the GSMC Weird News Podcast, and we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. My name's Mark Swan, and I'm your host today. And hey, did you know that we were part of a podcast network? I know I've been saying it every episode, but perhaps you're a new listener. Yes, that is correct. The GSMC Podcast Network is a network that covers a wide variety of topics in podcast form. We have car podcasts, we have TV podcasts. I like listening to the movie podcast because truly, I just don't have a whole lot of time these days to watch movies. And I like having a voice tell me what's going on, what's good. It's a subject that interests me. And hey, you might find something that interests you as well. So if you like weird news like I do, go ahead and look up some of our other podcasts. And hey, did you know that I'm not the only host of the GSMC Weird News Podcast? Please listen to some of the other episodes. The other hosts for this show are great, and they bring topics that I wouldn't even come up with. So good for them. And you know what? Good for me too. We've had such a great show today. We were talking about the spy whale who escaped his confines, or was released, or maybe he's still being a spy right now. But regardless, this poor little beluga whale made his way up to Norway and is now just looking for a forever home. I'd adopt you if I could, good buddy, just as long as you weren't spying on me. After that, we went into the totally gnarly new fad of letting meat age for a year and rot, and then eating it to get high. I still cannot get the image of that rotten meat out of my head. How could you let something rot for a year before eating it? You must be influencing your future self. And hey, by the way, our third story today comes from Psychology Today, and it considers the idea of a person who empathizes with a version of themselves that doesn't exist. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, according to the book Blind Sight by Matt Johnson, people are notoriously bad at predicting how they'll feel about something in the future. And psychologically, we are prone to choose immediate short-term rewards at the expense of greater long-term goals. This sort of thinking can get a person some immediate gratification, but it deprives their future self of any rewards. And many times people don't consider that. In fact, there is evidence to suggest that we see a future version of ourselves as a stranger who we care very little for. According to this article, there was a study on May 11th, 2011, in which a group of research subjects were asked the question, would you like $5 now or $500 in 2 weeks? An overwhelming amount of the subjects ended up choosing to get the immediate reward. They wanted the $5 right then over the $500 in 2 weeks. Now, what was the rationale of not just holding off for $5 in 2 weeks? Well, as you may remember, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, in 2011, Harold Camping, the doomsday prophet, believed that on May 22nd, 2011, that the world would come to an end and that humanity would be raptured. Regardless if one of these research subjects believed in this absolutely preposterous world-ending theory, they were more concerned with getting an immediate reward than the possibility that their future self could get a greater reward. This sort of impulsivity, the idea that, hey, I could get a small reward right now, and I think that's much better than a future me getting a reward, is actually an incredibly common concept. A separate study by Dan Gilbert of Harvard University involved asking subjects to predict how their future self will feel in a year. The special circumstances of these particular subjects were that they had already recently dealt with something that made them unhappy. That reason being, these subjects were people who were recently stood up at the altar. Yes, that's right. They studied people who had their soon-to-be spouse abandon them before they were married. When these unfortunate souls were asked how they would feel in a year, they said that they would most likely be even worse off. The study doesn't end there. Gilbert revisited these subjects in a year and asked them how they were feeling, and the results might be surprising. Many of the subjects actually reported to be happier than ever and said that being left at the altar was one of the best things to happen to them. The study was further conducted on people of varying happiness levels, those who had great things happen to them recently and those who had terrible things happen to them recently. And the study found that in a year, a lot of these subjects were comparably happy. So what does this all mean? Why study someone who feels a certain way one moment and then a year later they feel something different? Of course that's bound to happen, right? It seems relatively obvious. The conclusions made by studies like these are that we are pretty bad at predicting how happy we'll be in the future, and we are especially bad at understanding how external events will impact the happiness of our future selves. So why do we do this? Why do we not consider our future self when it comes to the decisions that we make? Well, research suggests that our brain works in a way that we consider a future version of ourselves in the same way that we consider other people. This tends to mean we will only make decisions that benefit us impulsively and in the short run, and we will not tend to care about the future version of ourselves. When it's put that way, you have to ask yourself the question, how do I consider my future self in a way that's going to ultimately be beneficial? One method we can make as people is to consider our future self as a person who we love and deeply care for. Hal Hirschfeld, a professor at UCLA, says it may not be problematic to think about our future selves as if they are other people, as long as we see them as people with whom we have a close, emotionally bonded relationship. For those are the sorts of relationships that inspire us to make sacrifices. That makes a lot of sense to me. It's sort of like hey, if I don't eat this cake now, then this person who exists in the future is going to be thinner and in better shape. I don't know. Now we're just getting back to diets. But this methodology doesn't just apply to feeling better for yourself. There's research that says that having concern for your future self can help you make better financial decisions. In 2020, a study was conducted where students were shown an artificially aged image of themselves. And it says here that it motivated them to prepare better for their long-term financial futures. So, hey, if you're ever thinking of making an impulsive purchase, maybe flip Snapchat on and do the agifier filter on yourself, and you'll see a person that you will want to care for, and maybe you won't make big impulsive purchases so that that person will have more money. That's what I gather from this. The article ends by saying empathizing with our future self is inherently difficult but incredibly important, and that it is key to have a relationship with your present self and your future self. I found this article very impactful because, especially nowadays, we're all just trying to figure out where we're going to be in the future. I mention it every episode, but it has been a weird year, and there's been a lot of time to reflect on the things that we are trying to do and the things that we've already done. And I wonder if we would all be a little bit happier if we just considered our future self when it comes to the decisions that we make. I'm curious if there are any listeners out there who utilize meditation or other self-inward looking techniques. But if you do, or maybe you're just a person who stays up at night thinking about the things that will or will not happen to you, maybe it would help you to think about your future self. Now, if you're further interested in these concepts, I read about these studies and more from an article on Psychology Today by Matt Johnson called How Effective Forecasting Can Influence Your Future Self. Matt Johnson also has a book out called Blind Sight: The Mostly Hidden Ways Marketing Reshapes Our Brain. And I plan on picking this one up, and I may do a future segment on it. Now, the whole idea of having a conversation with your future self got me thinking about an old app I used to use called Future Me. Future Me can be found at futureme.org, and if you haven't heard of it, it is a fun little process in which you write a letter and you ask it to deliver this letter to yourself in 1 year's time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, or you can put a date of your own. Now, why would someone do this? Well, I think it's kind of cool to have a frame of reference of where you were some amount of time ago, and to have like a direct portal to what you were thinking at a certain moment and how you have changed or transformed since then. Future Me has been around for years and years. Actually, it says here that it's been around since 2002, and I do believe I was writing myself future letters in high school. I was actually planning on this segment today to find one of my Future Me letters, but unfortunately, I think I used an email address that I no longer have access to, so my apologies for that. So today, instead, I am going to write my future self a letter, and I hope you will join me for this particular exercise, because you know what? I want to show my future self some love. Maybe some good things will happen. And if I am still kicking it on the GSMC Weird News podcast a couple years from now, maybe I'll get this letter and we'll do a follow-up episode. That would certainly be an interesting time. So I am on futureme.org right now, and right at the front of the page is where you can just start writing a letter to yourself. I have a few things I want to tell my future self, but there is an ideas section, and I wanted to visit some of these. Future Me suggests that you send your future self a happy birthday message. It suggests that you send this letter to a future version of yourself after COVID-19 has passed and what we had learned. That's an interesting idea. It says you should send a letter to yourself on an important date of a future milestone. That's an interesting idea. I feel like I've done that before. I feel like I sent a Future Me email to when I finished school, but I can't find it. Send a letter to your kids when they'll be your age. Send a letter to yourself when you are your parents' age. Or send a letter to your spouse or partner on your anniversary. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and get myself started. Let's see. It says, Dear Future Me, think I'm going to make it say, Dear Mark, what's up? It's ya boy from the past, circa 2021. I hope you are doing well. If you wanted to remember who sent you this prophetic letter, it's me, Mark, the guy who just got the Weird News podcast gig and is doing a segment on empathizing with your future self. Remember that article, Mark? You found it really fascinating. And you admitted to yourself that you just don't empathize with yourself enough. So, remember, you've done some cool things in the past, and I hope you do some cool things in the future. And, I'm going to ask myself some questions too. Do you still host the GSMC Weird News podcast? Or have you taken over for Jimmy Fallon at the Late Show? Parentheses, fingers crossed. Have you lost weight, Mark? Or are you still wearing your COVID gym shorts every single day because your pants don't fit? And how is COVID doing anyway? Hopefully, we flattened that curve. I put a lot of U's in that. Anyway, I love you, man, and I empathize with you. Give Michelle and your mom lots of love for me. Love, 2021, Mark. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it deliver in just 1 year. I'm going to remember this hopefully and laugh. And then I am going to put in my email address. I'm going to send it to the future. This has always been such a cool concept to me. I really think preserving our past and having a conversation between our past and future selves has always been such a cool idea. But I think it would be even cooler if you could send a letter back to your past self. Like, I check my email and there's something waiting for me that was like, hey, got your letter from the future. Invest in more Dogecoin. Anyway, you are listening to the GSMC Weird News podcast. I'm Mark Swan, as you are probably aware by now. And after the break, I have 5 lesser-known cryptids that I want to share with you. I have to assume that if you're a Weird News fan like I am, you're kind of into the Bigfoots. You're kind of into aliens. You're kind of into stuff like that. Well, I'm reading a book at the present moment that goes over a large array of cryptids across the United States, and I'm going to share some of the weirder and lesser-known ones with you. We'll be right back after the bump.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
You are listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network, your source for all things weird, unusual, cool, frightening, disgusting like eating raw meat after it's rotted for a year. I can't get over it, audience. It's killing me. I used to be the food safety officer at my job, and if you were to tell me that somebody was eating rotten meat, I would lose my stuff, man. I'd lose my garbage, my moop. It's just too much. But hey, today's episode wasn't all gross. We had such a fun day today, empathizing with the poor spy whale that made its way to Norway just to find a home. We empathized with our future selves. Have you talked to your future self today? I wonder. Hit me up on social media if you ended up utilizing future me and tell me what you wrote about. Or don't. It's sort of like, getting a birthday wish. Maybe you don't tell people what you have talked to yourself about because maybe it doesn't come true. I don't know. I am quite excited to share with you our final segment of the day. If you are keeping tabs on your humble host, if you're listening about my life and you're updating the wiki accordingly, I'm happy to share with you that today's segment hits a little bit home. I have family in the Maine area, so I get to visit up in the Northeast. Not as often as I want to, but every time I go, I have such a great time. Maine is one of those places that a lot of people just don't ever consider. Like, it's almost a secret. I tell people that I have family in Maine and they're like, Maine? What is in Maine? And the answer is sometimes not much. Big rural area, lots of friendly people, some not so friendly people. I don't know. I'm not judging. Beautiful foliage in the fall time. I know there are a lot of people who travel up north to watch the trees turn over, and you see them go from green to yellow to orange to red almost in real time. If you are a weird news fan like me, Maine might be a spot that I insist you visit. A lot of weird stuff up there. Stephen King has a house up there, as you may well know, and if you didn't know, you could probably assume, since 60 to 80% of his stories take place in Maine. And there's good reason. There's just like a vibe up there. There's like miles and miles of impenetrable forest, and it's just a really interesting place. And why do I bring up Maine? Well, because Maine is home to a weird capital of the world. If you ever find yourself in Portland, Maine, I sincerely suggest you check out the Cryptozoology Museum. According to the website, the International Cryptozoology Museum was founded in 2003 and has a collection of thousands of items for you to see. We appeal to all ages and are a family-friendly museum. In 2016, we relocated from downtown Portland, Maine to Thompson's Point. Our two-story museum is curated with a wide variety of cryptozoological specimens, oddities, artifacts, and novelty items surrounding the study of unknown creatures. Continuing in 2021 is our Sasquatch Revealed exhibit. I had the pleasure of going to this museum some years ago, and it is truly fantastic. There is all sorts of memorabilia and historical artifacts related to cryptozoology. And for those in the dark for what cryptozoology is, it is, of course, the study of animals that may or may not exist. And that's my editorialized definition. If you want to be more specific, it's of animals that we don't necessarily have all the facts on, and we might not know if they exist or not, but you can find specific and famous examples in the study of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, animals like that. The urban myths and the urban legends, I have to assume that wherever you're listening from, there is some strange natural entity that exists in rumor around your local area. And once again, I'm in Colorado. This is one of the Bigfoot capitals of the United States, if not the world. You could go to fishing points where there are very real warnings of Sasquatch sightings and and postings that say, please do not interact with the animal. Whether or not it's a farce is to be determined. I mean, it could just be a goof, but it's certainly presented in a way that it's like, look, if you see a Sasquatch, we have reason to believe it's a dangerous entity. Don't try and tackle it or hug it. I don't know. Point being, when I had the pleasure of perusing the International Cryptozoology Museum, I came across an awesome book called Mysterious America by Lauren Coleman. It's described as the ultimate guide to the nation's weirdest wonders, strangest spots, and creepiest creatures. This is a fascinating and exhaustive read. It goes over a wide array of sightings of all kinds of weird and possibly existent animals. I was reminded of this book while I was doing research for the weird news segments for this very podcast, and that got me thinking, I kind of want to bring some of this book to you today. I'll plug it again because if you're a fan, this is an absolute essential to read. Once again, it's Mysterious America by Lauren Coleman. And today I am going to share with you my top 5 lesser-known cryptids. I will never not be a fan of cryptid culture. I think the idea that we don't know as much about this world that we think we do is such a cool concept. I will always be a stern believer in this. Number 5 on my list is my boy, the good old Champ. I bring up Champ because when people think of cryptids, or at least they are marginally interested, they think of the Loch Ness Monster. That is, of course, the supposed dinosaur-like creature that swims about the Loch Ness. It is one of the most famous cryptids in history, and there is evidence that borders on convincing that the strange creature may exist. What people may not know or understand is that we in the United States have an equivalent to the Loch Ness Monster, and his name is Champ. Named after Lake Champlain, the Great Lake that borders New York, Champ is an alleged sea serpent that has had sightings since before the 1600s. Samuel de Champlain, for whom the lake was named after, describes the monster as 20 feet long, as thick as a barrel, and with a horse-like head. Champ has apparently existed through the ages, either as some sort of long-living creature or some sort of animal that has lots of babies, because we still have pictures, sightings, and accounts of witnessing Champ to this day. Much like our old friend Nessie, Champ seems to resemble a plesiosaur or other long-necked, water-dwelling dinosaur. Number 4 on our list of lesser-known cryptids is Illinois' mysterious devil monkey. According to Mysterious America, during the summer of 1941, Reverend Marsh Harpole was hunting squirrels along the Gum Creek bottom near Mount Vernon, a small city in the southeastern county of Jefferson, when a large animal that looked something like a baboon leaped out of a tree and walked upright toward the startled hunter. Harpole, in turn, struck the creature with the barrel of his gun and then frightened it away by firing a couple of shots into the air. After this incident, sightings of the mysterious devil monkey would persist for decades afterwards. One account describes the creature as having 3 legs, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. While locals were put into a panic by the devil monkey, it had the unforeseen circumstance of garnering traffic from tourists hoping to see the weird creature. I just love the idea that coming into contact with a monkey is not so weird until you consider that it's in Illinois. That far back, I wonder if it was some sort of zoo escape or if it's just mass hysteria, which we've talked about on the show before. Number 3 on our list of Mysterious America's lesser-known cryptids is the phantom clowns. The reason why I put this one on the list is because it's in conjunction with a previous episode of mine in which we explored the mysterious clown sightings of 2016. Apparently, this wasn't a unique incident. In the spring of 1981, Boston, Massachusetts appears to have been the port of entry for a new version of the Pied Piper. During the first week of May, some individuals in multicolored clothes began trying to entice school children into coming along with them. The reports of clowns in vans bothering children were openly discussed in the newspapers by the school committee, the area police, and scores of parents and children. Much like the clown sightings of 2016, these mysterious clowns apparently popped up all over the country, not only in Boston, but also in places like Kansas, where they appeared to hunt or predate on small school children. This could just be an issue of sick people doing sick things, but when you use it in conjunction with the 2016 sightings, kind of makes you think if there's some sort of weird clown dimension where monsters appear it style and just try and assault America. Around the 80s, when these sightings were happening, many critics were quick to connect the phantom clown sightings to the satanic panic. That is to say, they thought these entities were men who were trying to terrorize locales for the sake of Satanism in some sort of magic sorcery ritual. No comments. It's very possible, but if you remember, the satanic panic thing kind of blew up beyond what the real danger was. I think Dungeons and Dragons and rock and roll records were also part of satanic panic. And, you know, we still have both of those, and they're not so bad. Number 2 on our list was chosen simply because of his name. It is the Mad Gasser of Mattoon and his kin, bringing us back to Illinois in the 1940s. An overwhelming amount of residents were going to the police with complaints that they were smelling odd odors and experiencing dizziness and other psychological effects, and claiming that it was like someone had gassed them. There was an epidemic of mysterious illness and vomiting and other ill effects, due in part to whatever this strange odor and feeling was. Police investigated and found that there was evidence of some prowler breaking into houses. This entity, whether it be mortal or no, was apparently emitting some sort of strange gas to its unsuspecting victims. Despite the fact that this alleged prowler had broken into so many homes and escaped without a relative trace, the police reported that there were no accounts of this entity, be it supernatural or otherwise, stealing from or assaulting homeowners. The Decatur Herald, the local newspaper, reported on these weird events, saying 12 persons in the last week have been visited by the nocturnal prowler, who shoots an unidentified chemical into bedchambers through open windows. Cases have been reported in all sections of Mattoon. Victims report that the first symptom is an electric shock, which passes completely through the body. Later, nausea develops, followed by partial paralysis. They also suffer burned mouths and throats, and their faces become swollen. The attacks of the Mad Gasser persisted with no clue as to his identification. The attacks were so frequent that the town was, of course, put into a panic. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon was never caught, and police remain baffled to this day, though critics do say this could be another case of mass hysteria. Our number 1 spot on today's top 5 list of lesser-known cryptids is the Minnesota Iceman. Fans of Bigfoot culture are probably familiar with this anomaly. In Milwaukee in 1967, an exhibit apparently featured a fresh, authentic corpse of a hairy man-like animal. For 25 cents, people could see the man left over from the Ice Age, quote-unquote, that exhibitor Frank Hansen kept frozen in a block of ice inside a refrigerated glass coffin. The Iceman appeared to be a hair-covered hominid and less resembled Bigfoot and more looked like a modern depiction of a caveman or other proto-human, perhaps one of our early close ancestors. The strange and baffling thing about the Minnesota Iceman is that his body had an apparent gunshot wound through his eye, suggesting that whoever found this creature had to kill it to capture it. The story of the Minnesota Iceman is so fascinating because it includes a conspiracy that involves the original body of the creature being taken and replaced with a sort of body double that retroactively proved that the creature's corpse was a hoax. If you want to read more about this fascinating tale and others, I once again must suggest you pick up Mysterious America by Lauren Coleman. Lauren Coleman has wrote a ton of books on cryptids and other fascinating events, and it's just such a great read. Very well written, very exciting. It's not just bland and fact after fact. It's a really cool read. I suggest it to you. Man, we need to start a book club. I have so many recommendations, and I just want to read with you, dear listener. That's about it for today. This has been the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Go ahead and find us on social media. I want to get in a conversation with you over Twitter. I challenge you to hit me up and tell me your favorite cryptid, and then let's have a conversation about it. And you know what? If you don't have a favorite cryptid, hit me up anyway, because I am always looking for weird news, and I am just one man, and I scour the internet every time I can for more stuff to talk about with you. But I know I miss stuff. So if there's a story that you'd like me to cover, suggest it to me on Twitter. Once again, the GSMC Weird News Podcast, on all sorts of social media. And hey, this is where I close out the show with my normal spiel. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you.